Ms. Alice Maclean, Director, Student and Graduate Research, Department of Immigration and Border Security, to please come and do her slides.
I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of the trends that are happening in two of our key markets, being India and Nepal. To begin with, I am really keen to acknowledge the great relationship that the Department of Immigration and Border Protection shares with our agents and our providers, and all the people that are involved in the international education industry. The truth of the matter is that it's your great recruitment practices that help us to build a successful program. Excellent, so we're going to kick off with some stats, because everybody knows how excited I get around the stats, and they are a really good illustration of what's happening in the market. So in 2015 to 16, the number of visa applications lodged by Indian citizens for a student visa increased by actually 3.6%. Thank you. And this means that there were over 40,000 applications lodged. However, what's really impressive is that the lodgements for Indian students who are outside of Australia actually increased even larger. So what we saw was that increased by 8%. Okay, so look, it is a little bit lower than the average student increase, where we saw students outside of Australia increase by 9.5%. But let's look at it in terms of grants, because that's where the really exciting story is for India. So the number of student visas granted to Indian students who are outside of Australia also increased by 8.9% when we compare, of course, to 2014-15. So when I see lodgement growth that, okay, is less than the student visa average, but then I see grant growth, which is even higher, what this tells me is that on the whole, we're recruiting fantastic students out of India that are meeting our requirements. So look, the table on the slide breaks down grants for Indian students by sector. What's notable, of course, is that the higher education sector is still making up a considerable part of the market, so we're talking about 86.2%. However, this market share has decreased since last year, where it made over 90%. However, the really interesting story for India isn't happening in higher education, it's happening in the vet sector. So, this year, the Indian students in the vet sector are my top source country, which is absolutely fantastic, and you're responsible for about 16.9% of lodgements in the vet sector. So lodgements from students who were outside of Australia for vet sector in India actually increased by 142.3%. Now I get asked when I see figures like that, am I frightened? And the answer is no. Look, it has moved from a low base. But what I am a little bit concerned about, of course, is the increase in grants. So the increase in grants is only around 122.5%. So we've got many more students being granted visas, but less students being granted. So, sorry, the increase between grants and lodgements is obviously very different. Now the growth is fantastic, but look, to be perfectly frank, we can see a little bit of room for growth there. When I start to look at the grant rate, we end up with a grant rate of about 36.6% for vet students out of India, and that obviously leaves quite a bit of room for improvement. To give you something to measure that against, the grant rate for all vet students sits at around 70.4%. So it is quite different. What this is telling me is that we are still getting quite a high proportion of non-genuine vet students from the Indian market. Look, overall, that of course impacted the grant rate for India, which did drop this last year. But unfortunately, the good news story about the higher ed grant rate, of course, has been a little bit diluted by that vet figure. So the grant rate actually dropped to 72.4%, and that's from a base of about 79%. Look, I'm really keen to see that grant rate turn around this year, and I do think that the right agents recruiting the right students is the key to amending that and changing that trend. So the number of Indian students in Australia at 3rd of June increased And look, this is expected when we see grants go up and also expected when we see lodgements go up. So that's really positive, and it does mean that you are recruiting the right kind of students because they're actually coming here, which is fantastic. And look, that brings me to the final point that I wanted to make about the annual data for you, and that's around our temporary graduate visas, so our subclass 485. The share that Indian students have of this visa has increased by about 65%, which once again is indicating that Indian students are coming to Australia, studying, graduating and progressing on, which is absolutely fantastic. The integrity measures around our program are also showing some improvement for India, which is really very pleasing. But look, I know you guys love annual stats as much as I do. I know the most controversial thing is what has happened since the reforms. So obviously on 1 July the department underwent some incredibly exciting and quite radical reforms, and we were very keen to monitor what was happening with those. So the slide at the moment just gives you a bit of an overview of some of the changes. We're not really going to focus on that. Instead, I want to help you out to understand what we've seen since then. So first of all, June 2016. It was an incredible month for student visas. So overall, internationally, we saw an increase of about 40% in lodgements. Now for India, that was 55%. Oh my God. So that's June 2016 compared to June 2015. Now what this meant, and of course the impact that it has, is that we did start with a bit of a pipeline that we needed to progress through. But the great news is that between 1 July and 30 September, we granted 1.4% more student visas in that quarter than last year for India. So that was really positive. What that means is that all of our systems were working properly, and we were able to progress and actually grant more visas than what we had before. It really is reflective of the very positive way that staff in New Delhi, of course, embraced the changes, and that our agents were able to manage with the disruptions to the way that they normally did business. So look, the other measure that I normally wouldn't share, but in this forum I will, is our figure of on hand. So basically our cases on hand are cases that we've received, so that have been lodged and are valid, but we have not yet processed. And the really positive news is that as at 30 September, the number of cases from India that I have on hand is actually down 17.4% when compared to 30 September last year. That's fantastic. Now, when you consider that in light of higher lodgements, of course that becomes even more interesting. But I know what you're all thinking. On-hand figures are great, but the on-hand figures for offshore, so students that are outside of Australia, are even more impressive. So what we saw there is a 55.3% drop at 30 September 2016. So that is really showing that we are progressing through the applications that we're receiving at a rate that is very appropriate and that is fantastic and much better than what we were doing last year. All right, so the case is finalised for India between 1 July and 30 September. So we took about 36 calendar days for 75% of the cases. Now here you go, 36 calendar days doesn't sound very impressive, but when we compare that to the last year, the figure is actually 26 days less. So we are processing visas a lot quicker for students from India, and that of course is really positive news. All right, so I might flick over to Nepal. So Nepal is still a very important source country for us, and for visa holders in Australia, it ranks about number 4, and of course for grants it ranks about number 7. So in 2015-16, lodgements from students with Nepalese passport did increase by about 14.3%, and it was driven actually by applicants lodging in Australia, not outside of Australia. So when we look at students outside of Australia, we actually experienced a drop of 6.7%. So I don't think that given the events and of course the earthquake in April that this came as much of a surprise to the department, and nor should it come as a surprise to you, and nor is it particularly concerning. What is really positive is that when we look at grants, we see pretty much a comparable increase when we look across the program for Nepal of about 18.6%. But we see a whopping 42.1% increase in grants for students who are outside of Australia. So that's really positive. So although lodgements have dropped outside of Australia, we've seen a higher grant number. And look, that is really positive and quite reflective of course, the efforts and the time that agents and providers are putting into that market. Okay, so we do have some outliers, of course. The grant rate for Nepal increased in the last quarter of 2015-16 to 88%. So that's a great grant rate for Nepal. And of course the processing time for that quarter also dropped quite significantly to only 29 days. It took 85 days the year before. But I know as always you're more interested in what's happened since 1 July. So these figures are actually going to include the June figures for you, given that there was such a significant increase. It was where we really felt the effects of the simplified student visa framework. So lodgements, of course, in June increased by 120% for Nepal. So that was well over 2,000. And of course, lodgements from 1 June to 30 September was over 6,400. And it was up 63% with the new system. So that's quite impressive. Finalisations, sorry, I'm too short. Finalisations from 1 June to 30 September were up by 58.6%. Look, that's really positive, and what's more positive than just finalisations is the grants actually jumped 60.9% when compared this year to the same period last year. Grant rates stayed pretty much stable, which is fantastic and good news, so sitting about that 82 mark. And of course our on-hand for Nepal is also dropping. Excellent, so I might move on to something other than stats for you. Here are some hints and tips and some common errors that we're seeing under the new system. So almost every forum that I go to, I encourage agents to lodge complete applications. It really does make the difference in how quickly we can process your student. And obviously quick processing is not only good for you, it's good for us and it's good for your student. So what I mean by complete is actually answering the questions on the form. The form does now prompt you if you leave out a question, but it's more than that. It actually goes towards attaching documents that are relevant to back up any of the claims that are made in that application form. Look, really obvious one, and one that you cannot believe that we're missing, is a copy of the passport. It's really hard to verify someone's identity if I cannot see their passport. So it's great that you enter the passport number in the form, but we would really like that copy attached. Okay, so the next one is about applying early. So we obviously encourage all of our students to apply as early as they possibly can. So once they do receive their COEs, we really do encourage early applications. What we are saying publicly to most forums is that we do actually encourage students to lodge 6 weeks before their course commences. Now this is important because the department has stated that it aims to finalise 75% of complete applications in 1 month. So that extra 2-week window gives you and your student a little bit of space if more information is needed or we need to do some additional checks. Health examinations. Who here has ever heard of My Health Declarations? Great, use it. It allows students to do their health before they lodge with us. Having to go back and request health examinations is a really unnecessary delay that we're experiencing in the Indian market. Health insurance, my favourite subject. So health insurance is quite difficult because our regulations, of course, prescribe that a student must have health insurance for their entire proposed period of stay in Australia. So I'll give you a little hint here. If we see health insurance that starts on the same day that the course commences, it's not going to be good enough. Because we do not believe that the student is travelling when they are planning to commence their course. So what I'd advise you is make sure that that health insurance starts at least a week before the course commencement, and it should marry to the date that the student intends to travel. Of course, there are some exceptions to that. So if it is a very late lodgement and course commencement is very, very soon, we can accept it, but make sure that you include some evidence about when the student's going to travel in those cases. Of course, also look at when the visa is likely to expire. So our website gives you a whole bunch of information around a lot of different circumstances to talk about visa length. And that's very important because we will only grant the visa to the period that the health insurance expires. Alright, the next one is English and finances. So it's very important to remember that if English and finances are required, you must attach them. If you don't attach them, we will refuse the visa and we will not give students an opportunity to provide those documents anymore. So we do have a legislative basis for refusing upfront in those cases, And we really encourage you that when you get to the end of the form and you've got your whole list of documents that you need to attach, you must attach those English and financial documents or the application is at risk of being refused. So I do know, of course, that there are some grants that have happened without this information because we have assessed the student and just determined that we didn't require it, but that is not going to continue. So be really aware of the English and financial requirements. Okay, the GTE statements, my absolute favourite provision, it relates to GTE, and that's because it is incredibly controversial and it also allows us an opportunity to really get to know your student. So on the new online forms, we've given students more of an opportunity to tell us why they want to study in Australia, and also to provide additional documents at the end and attach anything that's going to support that statement. Now, when I'm looking at a really strong GTE statement, what I see is evidence of economic circumstances in country. Makes a lot of sense, right? I see information about how the proposed study fits in with their past study or experience. And of course see how the student plans to use their qualification that they receive in Australia in their future. And I also have information about incentives around returning to India or Nepal, like family, employment, community ties and the like. Now, of course, with some students, you won't be able to tick every single one of those boxes, and that's okay, because GTE is, of course, a consideration of the whole circumstances of the client. What this means, however, is try and strengthen the other parts of GTE, and you will have yourself a very strong GTE statement. Finally, there's just some tips about the form and some things that we've been noticing. First of all, use the help text. That little question mark in the little blue circle is really important. What it's doing is it's trying to tell you that there's more information sitting there that you might need to know about to be able to complete that question to the satisfaction of the department. A really common one is having students declared as Commonwealth funded students. Be really aware of that and do double check that scholarship. What will happen, of course, is that they are fee-free applications, and you will get to a lodgement stage and you will end up with an invalid application if you haven't confirmed that that scholarship is really from the Commonwealth. It's not an easy thing to do because often the names of the scholarships that universities are giving are very similar to the names that the Commonwealth are giving, so do ask a student to confirm before you submit that form. Secondly, don't attach a letter of offer and a COE for the same course. We don't need it and it slows us down. So we really would appreciate if you do just put in the information in the form around the COE. And of course the letter of offer, while relevant, you can attach at the end, but don't tick it in the form. As I said, it really is slowing us down quite a lot. Travel history. We know we're asking a whole heap more questions about where a student has travelled, and we do ask that you do your best with it. So obviously we want accurate statements from students, but often asking for 10 years of travel can be quite complicated for people who are moving around the world. So we do ask, do your best. If you can't get days, months and years, make sure you at least give us months and years. And look, if the student is unsure about their travel history, do include a statement to that effect so that we know that there's not some intentional fraud going on there as well. Read the question about electronic communication. It's changed, it will change again. That question is one of our favourite ones to try to fiddle with. Of course, if you want to receive all of the notifications by email because it's much faster for you. And finally, of course, if you do have a student who is intending to study in the postgraduate research sector, include a lot of information because what we are looking for, of course, is things like what they're intending to study and what fields they're intending to study. So anything you've got will help us to process that application without having to go back to the client for more information. All right, well, I think that's it for me, a little bit of a summary of all the fantastic things that are happening. But of course, I want to draw your attention to where to for more. So obviously our website is now up to date and has some excellent resources on there around the SSVF, but also resources about how to use the India account and all of the policy framework stuff. The High Commission site in India is absolutely fantastic now, and we are actually including some information about when the cases that we are currently processing were lodged. So it'll give you a good measure of how quickly we're getting through the caseload. And finally, of course, there's a whole bunch of departmental social media out there. And look, I do suggest join our Facebook page. It's where you get quick updates of things like outages, and it can be quite useful to receive that immediate sort of updates rather than having to wait for emails or formal communications from the department. All right, thank you very much for having me. I hope that gave you a good overview of two of our key markets, being India and Nepal, and of course some hints and tips for managing in SSVF. Thank you.
Any questions for Alex? Alex here. Pravina?
Hi, I'm Pravina from Monash University, and I have a question. Last month, as I was about to go on the biggest recruitment dive to India, I had some of my colleagues from some of the other markets who said the SSVF system had slowed down and there were delays in some of the other key markets. Now, I know we haven't reached the peak and the thick of the things in India. Are we going to expect any of those technical issues that will delay the process?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
So to be perfectly frank, there were delays, and look, these delays happened in our other key source market, which is no fun to manage. However, we did take action very quickly, and we made some very real changes to prevent that from happening at next peak. So we're actually in a better position entering our next peak than we were entering this peak for India. So I'm very confident that we will manage the flow of applications through.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Any questions?
Alice, wishing Uni SA. You mentioned Facebook. What do we search for?
Department of Immigration and Border Protection.
Okay. Well,
There should only be one of
there's
them.
only one, yeah?
Should be.
I'll let you know. Hang on. No, there is only one.
Any other questions for Alice, or do we let her go? Do we let her?
Let her go. That sounds like.
I'll be around all evening, so if you do have any questions, please come and visit me.
Informally, yep.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. I'd like to welcome Dr. Tom Calmer. No, sorry. I'll just introduce you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. And Manika Jain, Consulate General of India, Melbourne. Thank you. Can I please present a bouquet to Dr. Tom Calmer?